As the world mourns the people of the New Zealand mosque killings, it's hard not to think of the anti-immigrant, anti-Islam motives behind the attack. How can we bridge the divide and learn to welcome and love our neighbor? Well, Little Mosque on the Prairie tried to do just that. Let's take a look at a clip.
Do you really think that all Muslims are terrorists?
What, are you saying no Muslims are terrorists?
No, of course not.
I mean, you're the mayor's PR person, and your husband's a Lebanese Arab Muslim. Coinky dink?
Yes. Look, do you know who Angus Birchwood is?
One of Mercy's most respected citizens.
Would he hire a terrorist?
Of course not.
Well, my Muslim husband is renovating his house right now. Ergo, my husband is not a terrorist. See?
Clarke Donnelly is the executive producer of that show. Clarke, do you think that radio host from the clip echoes a lot of people's perception around Muslims?
Oh, absolutely. I think one of the reasons the show hit as big as it did is because what it did was it took a lot of the conversations that were happening around the dinner table that nobody wanted to talk about outside the home. Mm-hmm. You know, there were these sort of hidden things, suspicions and all kinds of things that people were feeling, even if they didn't want to admit they were feeling it, and this show kind of put it all out on the table. And Fred Tupper, the radio host there, is a great example of I think how people were feeling, and that's why that character really worked so well.
Wow, the Little Mosque on the Prairie was meant to be a show showing the lighter side of the Muslim community living peacefully in rural Canada. Of course, there's nothing to laugh about after a terrorist, a white supremacist, opened fire in 2 mosques in New Zealand. How do we stand with our Muslim brothers and sisters and say, you know what, no more, this can't happen again?
It's interesting, you know, I've been thinking a lot about it, and I think there's 3 ways that people are responding to this in good ways. And one is just sort of a basic kind of humanitarian way where we think, okay, we're all one people occupying one homeland. We've got to figure this out. We've got to treat each other right. And that's great, and it's happening. And for religious people, I think it's making a lot of them go back to kind of the core of what their teachings are, because it's the same in all the great world religions, you know, whether you're Hindu or Christian or Muslim or Zoroastrian or Baha'is like my wife and I are. When you go back and find those core teachings, there's no reason for this kind of bigotry and hatred. And then there's a third way that I think is really, really interesting, and that is finding sort of that there is really a sacred center to these great world religions. And when you see Islam and Judaism and Christianity as related, perhaps divinely related, which we haven't thought of before, we always see everything as separate, but maybe these are all part of more of a divine plan. So that's the third way. And when that happens, of course, then it's no problem seeing that other person as your brother, because it isn't just tolerance now, it's actually going way, way deeper than that and seeing a relationship between you. So.
Wow, a lot to unpack. Let's take another look at a clip from your program.
Islam has 5 pillars, and they are...
Hey, you guys got a mini bar instead of a pulpit. So where do you keep the vino?
It is minbar, not minibar. Muslims are not allowed to drink alcohol.
I don't think Joe's going to be converting to Islam anytime soon.
If you're a feminist, why do you cover your hair?
Well, it's about modesty. Hair is part of your sexuality, so you only show it to other women.
Using humor to kind of really break down some of these tough conversations is not an easy thing to do. Do you think the show is effective at really going one-on-one with a lot of these stereotypes that exist in our world?
Oh, I think so. It was very deliberate in that way. It took so many of the things that are controversial, like barriers in the mosque, for example, and it put it right out front. That became one of the main storylines, where in the mosque, it had never had a barrier between the men and the women before, and all of a sudden the conservatives in the mosque decided that they would like to put one in. So they got some old hockey boards from an arena that was being torn down, and that's what they used.
Wow, I'm wondering, how could people groups from both sides find reconciliation with each other? I know the desire exists. I know we say people need to come together and dialogue, but what can we do beyond that? How can we bring people groups together?
I think that a careful examination of the foundations of these religions, because these are religions that underlie these groups, and too often we just talk about cultural differences that are really superficial, so food or things like that, and when we just keep the conversation at that superficial level, then I think we're kind of doomed to failure. It really doesn't go anywhere. But if we examine, for example, Islam at a more critical level, if we begin to understand its role in triggering the Renaissance, for example, or its role in creating the nation state, you know, there may not even be a Canada were it not for Muhammad. These are things that I've learned a lot about in the making of the show. There's been tremendous contributions to civilization from both Islam and Christianity, and just understanding even some of those basics, I think, would change our perception and pull us out of this mindset that we tend to get locked in, where we're just part of this community and we're hanging on with both hands. To kind of see the bridges between us, that we're not as different as we think we are.
Using entertainment to reach the average Canadian as a particular approach is one strategy. How do you think Little Mosque was able to kind of use that entertainment approach and really great writing to kind of really reach society, cut to the issues that they're dealing with mentally, spiritually? How are you guys able to cut into that?
Well, I think that's the role of comedy. You know, I always think how effective comedy is at cutting through and making concepts real. You know, the example I always use is we can say that a lie travels faster than the truth, but Winston Churchill said that a lie gets halfway around the world before the truth gets its pants on in the morning. So you remember the second thing because it's comedy, and the first thing just sounds like a platitude. And with comedy, I mean, there's a great tradition of this. Back in the 70s, there was All in the Family and MASH and Mary Tyler Moore, and each of these took on major social issues, and they used comedy to address them. And I suppose the jury's still out as to how effective those things were, given that we seem to be in a world which is more and more divisive. But I would maintain that it's less divisive perhaps than it would have been had it not been for some of these attempts to bring comedy to the fore in solving some of these issues.
Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.